Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to introduce our distinguished guest today, who will be giving the lecture, Dr. 𝗂𝗧𝗍𝗃, Energy Technology Lead at PDO, who will be discussing energy renewal, essentially unit within PDO, which is turning the dial on energy transition, discussing collaboration models to accelerate Oman's energy transition.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Brian, and it's give me pleasure to be here today and shed some light on the collaboration models we have been working with so many stakeholders here in Oman to touch upon the transition agenda and how can Oman collectively and collaboratively go through this transition for the benefit of everybody. Just allow me to share my slides. Can you see the slides now?
Yep, looks good.
Right. Okay. So the discussion today, or the topic in the next 30 minutes, will be around the collaborative models to accelerate Oman energy transition, and we'll touch on some examples with whom are we collaborating, and how can the cross-sectorial or the cross-sectorial initiatives be enabled by the energy sector, which is by large one of the most the biggest and most affected or involved in the transition agendas. The content will go through the case for Oman collaborative energy transition. We'll also talk about some global transition trends, and especially on the human capital and on the industries or the sectors that globally would be affected, and we expect Oman as a major energy exporter to probably see the same trends and effects. On number 3, we'll touch upon energy renewal industrial collaboration spheres. What are the two main spheres that we are trying to build momentum in industrial collaboration in? And the thief of this discussion, I think, of this presentation will be on number 4. We'll go through 3 examples of previous or ongoing collaborations currently happening on the ground, and those are the demonstrators for the industrial collaboration for transition. We'll finish by just sending out some thoughts on what is next and how can we take this to the next level. Now, if we look at 2019 and deliberately here choose 2019 to take out any COVID biases, Oman top 5 exports were mainly the crude petroleum or the crude oil, petroleum gas, or more technically the LNG for those who are from the industry, and refined petroleums. This is some of the refinery products that we do have. Refineries in the country, and the 3rd refinery is on the way. Not all the refined petroleum from Oman are consumed, but the idea is to maximize the value. We can refine our petroleums and export those refined products. And number 4 on the top 5 export list is the semi-finished iron. And this is mainly driven by the Sahara industrial port and free zone, where we see the aluminium, the steel, and the steel manufacturing at different levels, supporting or exporting to the Asian market and the global market at large as well. And number 5, we have the nitrogenous fertilizers, and this is for those who are also in the industry, the ammonia and the urea, and all the fertilizers that actually rely on nitrogen and hydrogen, to be specific. Today in the country, we have quite a sizable urea and ammonia fertilizer plants that actually consumes natural gas to make those fertilizers. So this is also in the context of today's discussion. The energy sector is providing fertilizers for the agriculture sector, where the food comes from, and that is a critical part for the food part of the nexus. And if we look a little bit down the line or fast forward, what will happen to such exports, and how do the world perceive the energy transition impact on these top 5 exports from the country? And the map on the right shows you the main export hubs, I would say, or the main industrial and development hubs in Oman: Sohar, Asur, Duqm, and Salalah. Moving into the transition scenario, we already saw the emergence of new commodities in the global energy transitions. People already talk about low carbon crude and petroleum products, and I think last month there was an interesting announcement from S&P, who publishes the crude index prices and advise the market on how much crude is expected to cost. They announced that they're going to publish a CO2 intensity. So you will not only hear Brent crude price, but you'll also in the future is expected you will hear the crude pricing and the CO2 footprint or intensity, and it's already at a trial stage with S&P. On that is linking to number one. On number two, the LNG, we already hear LNG carbon neutral LNGs, and I think in Oman LNG was pioneering in testing out the first shipment of carbon neutral LNG. On number three, we already saw in the market the starting of demands for low carbon refined petroleum, green chemicals, some people would call them, and into the industry, the methanol and the like. On number four, on the semi or the finished iron product, green steel is already on the way to be traded in London Metal Exchange. And we've seen car manufacturers, for example, discussing the fact that if I'm going to build an electric car because I care about the environment, what about the steel I use in that car? All the components should be compliant, or low carbon at least compliant. So this is an emerging commodity tradable in the globe. We also see the low carbon and the green nitrogenous fertilizers. This is the green ammonia or the blue ammonia from natural gas, but without the CO2 effect. So all these top 5 commodities or top 5 exports in Oman are going to see changes in the future, and the transition would go at a certain speed. It is happening. The only uncertainty is how fast it is happening. Now, if we reflect on the global trends and what would this mean for the globe at large and for Oman specifically in the context of an energy exporting nation. On the top right side of the screen, you see how are the jobs expected to change based on 2 scenarios. Now, energy transition could have different magnitude and different speed. And the International Energy Agency states different scenarios. And on the top right side of the screen, you'll see a prediction of 2 scenarios of transition. STEPS, or the Stated Energy Policy Scenarios, which is the first 2 columns on the graph on the left. Those are basically an energy transition based on what countries have announced, what countries have put plans for, whether it is electric cars or electrification of the industrial sector or using solar and wind. And they have published or announced their pledges, including the NDCs or the contribution from countries to reduce the CO2. What would the impact of this be on the workforce? And the second scenario, which is represented by the 2 columns on the right of the top hand side graph, is the NZE, or the net zero energy scenario. The net zero scenario is basically the most aggressive scenario, or the most ambitious scenario, if we can say, where the whole world will not emit CO2 more than what it can consume. So there will be a CO2 neutrality or greenhouse gas neutrality in the atmosphere. So we all will continue the business, will continue the energy, but will not be contributing to any increase in the greenhouse gas emission. Both scenarios shows there will be changes to the workforce, for example. In both scenarios, there will be new jobs created. And those new jobs created will be far more than those jobs that will need to be retrained or repurposed. And this is an opportunity to all the energy consuming countries to start preparing for those new jobs. And the earlier we do it, the better we are prepared. And if you look at the new jobs, they are in the bioenergy sector, the renewables, and the power generation, the electric vehicle, the grid, and the energy efficiency, and all those topics. Somehow or another, we're touched upon since this morning on what are those energy transition spheres or businesses. If we move to the bottom graph, what we see is, again, different scenarios for the transition, and each scenario will assume a reduction of CO2 emission or CO2 equivalent emission. And if we look at the stated scenarios or stated energy transition scenario, we don't see much reduction. Again, what we see clearly here is the visible contribution of the power sector and the industry sector. This is the light yellow and the blue or turquoise bars. In a sustainable development scenario, which is a United Nations scenario for achieving sustainable development across the world, we see big reduction in the CO2 emissions, especially from those sectors. And again, in the most aggressive or the most ambitious scenario, the net zero emission would see big reduction in the in both industry and power sector. Again, the industry and the power sector are a major transition contributors. Having said that, and there was a need for setting up something or leading this transition or seeding the transition, if I may say. And then the energy renewal initiative comes in, and which is basically in another term, renewing the sector or driving the sector to the new or the renewed scenarios or the renewed settings of the energy sector in Oman. This was initially an initiative that was supported and initiated by IBM, PGO, OPAD, and many of the energy sectors that have encouraged the initiative or encouraged the work to be started. And we see two main spheres for energy renewal to act upon or to help the industry work together. That is the energy technology, where technology is a key for it. I think it's the IEA again who predicts that 90% of the transition will come, or the net zero scenario, 90% of the technologies needed to achieve the net zero are technologies yet to become commercial. So the technologies in the energy sector will play a major role, and it is inexpensive to verify and test technology. A collective and collaborative work on energy technologies is of benefit to the nation and benefit to the industry. And under energy technology, we're talking about energy technology centers where work could be very much focused on certain aspects, advanced biofuels that will be needed to decarbonize certain industries, GHG reduction, including the carbon capture, sequestration, and utilization, the CCSU, advanced chemicals, and digital technologies that are also expected to be a key enabler for this transition. Integrated energy models. I mean, we're moving from oil and gas as the only energy vectors in the country and for export into more complex energy system. We'll have renewables, we'll have hydrogen, other countries also have other sources. So understanding the interaction between the energy sources in the country is important, and that would need a lot of integrated modeling work. Strategic studies and cases for change, technology, intelligence, and scenarios will be one of the focuses for energy renewal in the time to come. The other aspect, or the other big sphere, is the energy value chain, and we need to develop the value chains. Energy transition will bring in new energy vectors like hydrogen. What about everything before and after the manufacturing of hydrogen? How can we develop the energy value chain from day one and move hand in hand? We develop the transition industries, and also we develop the energy value chain, including the knowledge management that come with it, and also the dialogue that come with it. Now, moving into a little bit of practical or examples, or what have we done so far? Where do we come from? I think we'll talk about three main examples. The first example is the National Hydrogen Alliance. Again, this is an example that was also touched upon this morning by Dr. Abdullah, where we see the hydrogen or the clean hydrogen as a future energy carrier that will not only help decarbonize the country's industries, but also provide an economic diversification element where Oman is going to be an exporter of hydrogen in different forms. And the global outlook for commercialization of hydrogen that is already started in certain areas. Now we talk specifically about clean hydrogen, that is hydrogen from renewables, which is green, or hydrogen from natural gas, but without the CO2 emission, which is blue. We see a good momentum in the transportation sector, industrial feedstock. We already have industries that rely on hydrogen, but this hydrogen is produced in a non-sustainable way, or would need to reduce the footprint of CO2 footprint of this hydrogen, especially in refining, in ammonia and methanol, where natural gas today is consumed to produce ammonia and methanol, and the CO2 is emitted. Would need to gradually move into producing low carbon ammonia and low carbon methanol and low carbon refined product. On the transportation sector, I think it is well evident that while electric cars are moving very fast when it comes to the small passenger cars, will have the long distance and the heavy trucking that would need hydrogen, because it is more advantages comparing to batteries, where you would need really massive big batteries, heavy batteries to move a bus. When it comes to hydrogen, the weight or the energy per mass of hydrogen is much more lighter comparing to a battery, for example, for large application. Shipping and flights and airplanes will need to move into sustainable fuel in the long run. This is beyond 2030, where we would have to cut the emission from air travel and shipping. Industrial energy, a lot of energies use heat, and today that heat in Oman and most of the globe is provided by natural gas that would need to be decarbonized, or the intensity of CO2 to be reduced. And the only way to do that is by introducing carbon neutral fuels, or like hydrogen, or capturing the CO2 from the natural gas. The same goes for the building and heat and power. Now, to shed some light on the Hydrogen Alliance, or the National Hydrogen Alliance that we have been working with, it's a 15 organizations now. So we started with 13, and subsequently we had 2 more governmental organizations interested to be part of this alliance. It's a 15 organization of government, energy, and academia that is collaborating together to integrate the development of the fundamentals of hydrogen. As we go forward, we have already seen hydrogen projects being announced in Oman. There would need to be an ecosystem to support these projects. We identify and investigate the value added from hydrogen blending, for example, hydrogen for export and hydrogen chemicals. What other industries can rely on the clean hydrogen that we're going to produce in Oman? We'll look also into developing a shared vision for powered hydrogen economy by 2040, capitalizing on the Sultanate-rich energy heritage. We have been energy exporting nation. We have a lot of capabilities when it comes to human capitals, when it comes to systems. Dealing with gas is part of our energy ecosystem, and hydrogen is an extension to the energy story in Oman, and as such, we should be acting upon that. We'll have a lot of engagement in structured policy and discussions within the 𝗲𝗲𝗍. Just like any new technology or a new introduction, there will be policy and strategic enablers needed to ensure we maximize the benefit of this newcomer to the energy industry. And the implementation roadmap in collaboration with all the key players would also need to be looked at within the context of the Hydrogen Alliance. The second example that I would like to talk about is the industrial digitalization survey and strategy. Now, digitalization is a key enabler for the transition, and I don't think transition can be effective or speedy enough without capitalizing on the digitalization. Having said that, there was a need, or we saw a need, where we need to understand the aspect of digitalization within the energy sector. So we launched out a collaborative work under the support of the Ministry of Energy and Minerals and various energy companies, including Petroleum Development Oman and others, to map out the local capabilities in the industry, understand the global perspective, and how does that global perspective going to roll down on the industry, and also understand the local perspectives and as is and future demand, and where are the gaps today in the digitalization capabilities and in the digitalization also understanding and projects in Oman. And furthermore, from that, hopefully we'll be concluding this work sometime by mid of next year, and we look into designing a strategy and roadmap where the industry collaboratively can work on demonstrators, can work on proof of concepts of some of the digitalization technology. There are so many applications and opportunities, but the challenge is how do you prioritize and which one that brings the biggest value, and not to be overwhelmed by the digitalization enabler. The workflow for this work has started this year. We'll look into 4 main work packages or milestone deliveries. The current status will be mapped, the future status and the gap analysis, and coming up to the end with the strategy and the roadmap. Now, moving on from the digitalization, of course, the coverage of this, we had quite a good participant, and the idea was to look at the whole ecosystem that plays in the digitalization, including academia, SMEs and startup, the big IT companies, the industry. When we share the industry, we have covered the oil and gas, the energy sector or the power sector. We've also included other industries like the manufacturing or the small manufacturing industries, and the government's entities that are also key and part of the ecosystem to come up with a well-understood picture of the digitalization. We're expecting few key insights, or we've already seen few key insights from the survey that we have conducted. It's a listed insight. I think I'll pick few from these. Like we've already have a good map of the current digital project in different sectors, and what is the focus of each sector, and how can we create the synergies between different sectors. The R&D scope is critical to be identified well above of time. If energies are moving into a certain strategic technologies, it makes sense to align the R&D scope in the country with such technologies. We'll also look into the status of digital roadmap within companies. There are different maturities or different level of maturities within the energy sector. How can the sector learn from each other, and how can we also have a cross-sector learning? How can the agriculture sector also learn from the energy sector when it comes to digitalization? The third example, which is more on the technology demonstrators or on the ground demonstration of the transition technologies that we have talked about at the beginning, which is energy technologies are a key pillar in the transition. We have worked together with two of the key players within the Nexus. We've worked together with Oman LNG as an energy player, and Mazoon Dairy as a company from the food sector. Where we've managed to put a collaborative project for energy demonstrator or a new energy demonstrator from biogas. Mazoon Dairy already, as you heard from Saleh this morning, invested in a biogas plant, and where they are already into the circular nature of their production. However, that biogas plant could be upgraded, and the new technology of biogas to power could be tested to demonstrate this for the future projects. That yes, we have waste in the food sector or the food production sector. That waste could be turned into energy and consumed. So we've got Oman LNG to support in a project where the biogas engine was brought in to be integrated with an existing biogas plant to produce green power that can be locally used by Mazoon Dairy. And this is one of the examples that are on the ground where industrial collaboration across sectors is key for the success of the transition. So what is next? I think moving forward, it's very important that energy transition agenda should be founded on framework-based collaboration. So far, what we have seen throughout the 2 years and so working with the industry, it's a project-based, and we'd like to find an opportunity and then build that opportunity in the project. I think time is here to have a framework by which there's an evident transition programs and there are evident transition projects collaboratively funded or collaboratively worked on by the industry. There would also, in point number 2, be a need for a collaborative and shared national energy transition infrastructure. We are already talking about carbon capture. We'll still rely on our natural gas, but there will be a need to remove the CO2. We would need to build a shared CO2 pipelines, for example, where all the decarbonization initiatives in different part of the country can tap into that national infrastructure. It's a big venture. There's a big fund needed for such thing, and sometimes it's prohibitive for single entities to fund their own decarbonization agenda, and collective funding and collective infrastructure is one of the key aspects going forward. We need to develop the carbon capture utilization and storage clusters, CCUS. I've talked about it a lot this morning. by different people that if the country would continue to rely on oil and gas for the energy input and the decarbonization need to happen gradually, and CCUS is part of the game. Again, hydrogen hubs were talked about here as an enabler for the hydrogen, moving from projects into hubs where there is an integrated hydrogen ecosystem. The third point, I think what we need to see next in the country is a visible, timely, and strong policy and regulatory support for energy transition. I don't think people should be allowed to cash in from the environment. Oman has commitment to the NDC, and that commitment should be enforced and it should come from the industry, and we should transit the first or the biggest emitter should play their role into the NDC or the national district contributed onto the CO2 reduction of the country. And last, I think as a message to send out that Energy Renewal was set up to encourage collaboration. We do welcome collaboration and partnerships to enable Oman energy transition. And as I said before, it's a journey that all should walk in it together. I mean, we shouldn't leave somebody to fall behind, because it is a transition to the industry, a transition to the country. With that, I think I would like to end my presentation, and then thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Khalil. I appreciate your presentation. For all attendees who are currently with us, just feel free to ask any questions in the chat box and we'll address them as well. I'd kind of like to kick off with one, essentially touching on collaboration, as you've mentioned. I just, was in a session before this touching on circular economy, the energy transition, and of course, collaboration and let's say, getting rid of silos essentially was a key element of that. I think a key element of today. But it was with international speakers who were offering best practice models for Oman. But coming from an Oman perspective, Energy Renewal, PDO, has done a lot of work in collaborating with partners throughout Oman. What would you say if you were looking outward from your perspective of best practice models for collaboration, sharing throughout the region internationally? What do you think would be your recommendations and actions based on your experience? You mentioned the Hydrogen Alliance, you have 15 partners there. 𝗍𝗁 was a massive partnership and collaboration effort. What do you think if you had to export your experience and practices in this space? What would be your key points that you'd want to touch on?
Thank you for the question. It's an interesting one. I think the international collaboration comes to me at two folds or two angles. We will continue to be an energy exporting nation, and there's no better than collaborating with your customers. So we do have customers in specifically in Asia. Well, if you look at our LNG and our crude, the majority of our LNG and crude goes out to Asia, and I think there will be a key element in energy transfer, for example, and also investment collaboration. So the customers should be able to bring in investment and collaborate at that level. When the investment is a shared investment, there is a sustainability there's a long-term sustainability in the project, especially in the hydrogen project. And I think we started seeing that where investment, collaborative investment or foreign investment is allowed, and it's sometimes by the customers themselves, and that is a good model we should continue build in. The other aspect, I think, when it comes to the know-how and the knowledge transfer, we are entering into a transition era that would hopefully post 2030 or 2040 will lead to a new energy system. I don't think we should walk into the similar scenarios where we have the resources, the technology is brought in, and there is no actual technology development or technology transfer. I think we should start from now with the technology transfer, looking into the 2040 horizon and beyond, where there is an actual technology development to fuel the energy export.
You mentioned, of course, a big part of this, of propping this transition up and pushing it forward. You mentioned developing skill sets and, of course, the job opportunities behind this transformation. How is Energy Renewal working with, let's say, academia, society within Oman to develop those skill sets and kind of really get it out there to Omani youth, this challenge that's currently taking place and the opportunities in that space?
Yeah, I think I would like to point out to two programs greatly supported by the industry, seeded or initiated by PDO, as PDO has always been generous and leading in this area. As we speak today, I have six young boys and girls in the office that come from two programs. They are from either the intern program, which is for people who finish university that already training in the industry, and we have also four young bright ladies from the 𝗖𝗲𝗲 program. If you've heard about 𝗖𝗲𝗲 in Arabic means preparation or to prepare somebody for something, and they are doing a year in industry. I think with the support of the industry collectively, again led by PDO and by Energy Renewal support, we managed the industry launched for the second year now, the year in industry. This is shaping the higher education systems to allow students to take one more year, paid year, into the industry to make sure that when they go back to their final year in the universities, the nature of the work or the nature of the thinking before they graduate is already an industrial thinking. They have seen the transition, or they have seen
a sharpened focus, essentially.
Yes, and they have also know what worries the energy sector, for example. Now the transition and the CO2 emission is a word that they will take with them when they go back to their final year, and then 1 year after that they come out to the market with a conditioned mindset or prepared. I think the industry is doing a lot when it comes to preparing the workforce now, let alone the training and the purposing, but it's really important to prepare the young guys who are coming into a different time in the industry.
I just wanted to touch on hydrogen as well. You mentioned hydrogen hubs, and a key aspect that comes up in our conversations with our stakeholders throughout the region is exporting hydrogen. What is the best way to export hydrogen? Is it to export it directly, or to develop, as you mentioned, a hydrogen hub? You could create sustainable steel, for example, produced from hydrogen. What are you seeing from an energy renewal perspective, and what do you think is the best kind of path forward for Oman in that space?
I think on the hydrogen export, and there are maybe a technological limitation and an energy also. You have to be energy conscious. There is no point producing a sustainable fuel and then shipping it and causing a lot of emission. And those both elements should be looked into together. So we do produce the hydrogen. Gray hydrogen is a mature technology. The blue and the green hydrogen is coming up. When it comes to shipping this hydrogen, I am not a big supporter, and I don't think it would be shipping the hydrogen as just hydrogen. It has to be converted for several reasons. I think one reason, if we look at sea shipping, we ship LNG by sea today. If we're going to ship hydrogen by sea and then run the ship by a hydrogen derivative fuel, the same way I'm just drawing the analogy to LNG, green ammonia or blue ammonia would be one of the attractive derivatives of hydrogen that could be produced. And again, this will allow us to capitalize on existing knowledge. We already have ammonia plants in Oman, for example. Now, it is much faster, much more efficient converting these into a green or blue ammonia rather than building from scratch, and that's one. The other aspects, maximizing the value. So if I am going to produce green steel and there is a market for green steel, I am maximizing an in-country value, and that will create more jobs, and we should also go that route. So it is not one way or another. I think we should target both routes, grow our local industry. We have far more resources than what we can observe locally, and also start driving the export industry as well.
From the hydrogen conversations we've had as well, there seems to be kind of an imbalance in supply and demand dynamics, where supply might not be the actual issue, but generating hydrogen demand and the incentives that come with that. From your perspective at PDO and Energy Renewal, are you seeing framework being put in place to help generate that hydrogen demand within Oman?
Yes, I think policy incentives and global push toward decarbonization would help. We have seen the COP26 mentioning coal for the first time, and even though there was a last minute push to change some terms from coal phase out to coal phase down, and I think replacing coal by policy or by hydrogen reduction incentives in Asian market, especially, is a good opportunity to increase that demand. And again, the technology is very crucial here. We have already tracking the development with the Japanese, where they are co-combusting ammonia, which is a hydrogen derivative, and coal. So they won't have to invest into completely new hydrogen facilities or hydrogen power facilities. The technology would allow us to transit and co-mix coal with the hydrogen as we phase down or phase out coal from the world. And we are lucky here in Oman, we don't have coal power plants, we have gas power plants. But again, that is something we need to think about in the longer term, 2030 and beyond. How can we decarbonize our power sector and at the same time make it resilient to the environment and the climate change?
And just lastly, you had mentioned digitalization. I think we're seeing digitalization as a key aspect. I mean, if we're addressing water, food, energy nexus, it actually might be the glue that can help connect everything together, and especially accelerating energy transition. In Oman currently, and I imagine PDO and energy renewable in this way, and with your survey as well that is being completed, are you seeing that in terms of digitalization, stakeholders in this space are still kind of at the beginning of their journey, or are there roadmaps being created? Is it kind of siloed in the sense where one might be here, one might be there? How are you seeing that in Oman at the moment? And do you think that there needs to be more cohesion in that digitalization space?
I think what we have seen so far is variations. I think there are certain aspects that pushes certain organizations to be forefront in it comes to digitalization. For example, companies that are large in size and have focus on efficiencies, they seem to tap into digitalization to understand. Big companies will suffer from not knowing or not seeing the facts. So digitalization will bring all these data to your eyes and you can act quickly. The smaller companies probably they don't see the need, but I think they're happy to kind of learn and get on when the product is final and shaped. And the interesting part, I think, on this variation is we've seen a lot of the young workforce are digital ready, or those what the research call them digital natives. You don't have that hurdle or that difficulties in embedding digitalization with people. The young workforce are digital ready, digital native. I think the companies and the boards and they could capitalize on this. You don't need to do a lot of training courses. Believe me, I mean, if you introduce these digital tools to the younger generation of our workforce, they'll just pick it and embrace it. And that is an opportunity we never had in the past, where you have to spend a lot of money and time on teaching people how to use a certain place.
Well, they say YouTube is a good tool to learn a lot of things. We have some questions from the chat I just want to bring in, and one of them, first one's talking about, again, from your perspective, how you're seeing education aspects. How do you see the enthusiasm and the urgency response with our in-country universities in Oman to inject energy transition curriculums in their programs? We might have some segments here and there that could be siloed, but an energy transition push, essentially, that touches on that transformation.
I think it's a good question from 𝗲𝗲𝗯𝗆𝗲𝗏. I think we need, as an industry, we need to do more. We need to really make our voice heard and help the universities and the academia, because in a traditional academia will always be busy by teaching, and they don't probably have the same focus as we have as an industry, because for us it's going to affect our profit. It's going to CO2 taxation may be coming, so we are on our toes for this, and we need to help the universities, and I think we have done a lot, and we need to do more in terms of embedding this. We reach out. We don't wait for universities to come out, but we have to reach out, and probably what we've seen when we do that move, we are always welcomed. It's just maybe the nature of the stressed academics in Oman who have to do a lot of teaching, but I think we have seen great collaboration even in outside working hours if you walk in. But you need to, I think the industry need to make that move rather than wait for academia to ask for help. Go in, be proactive, offer some of your time and some of your expertise to academia. I think it's really, really much appreciated when they see you forthcoming, because that support is needed, and this will pay off. After some time, the same people you are helping, there will be the people who will come and work for you. So if you are there 1 or 2 years before they graduate, at least they understand your terminology. You have a much easier life, onboarding them into the job. So it really pays off.
And I think that actually touched on a big point in our last session as well, the idea of localization and energy leading kind of that space to create innovation hubs, as you mentioned, leading that with academia. We have another question as well, kind of touching on the people, planet, profit concept. With countries and blocs are introducing new policies to limit the import of high CO2 footprint products, how is Oman, as an oil and gas exporter, planning to transition to new energy swiftly and without compromising the GDP and people within the vast industry? I mean, from a PDO perspective, how is energy renewal addressing that concept, or what is your perspective of that people, planet, profit concept, which is all part of this transition?
Yeah, I think in a way that we are lucky, or we do have the resources to tackle the emission. Oman is blessed by the natural resources, oil and gas, and that same resources will help us decarbonize. We have also blessed by the natural resources when it comes to the epheulite, which is a natural rock that can mineralize CO2. We do have the resources to deal with the emissions. It is maybe for time to come, how do we align our financial inputs and our focus into utilizing these resources? And we are not stranded when it comes to resources, but we need to make sure that we prioritize and we move at a speed that is the right speed for the world as well, because we said we are an energy exporting nation and we have to listen. If your customers are no longer buying the same goods, you have to adapt. And I think that is important. The speed as which you will utilize our decarbonization resources will depend on how the world is as a customer, basically, for the energy pushing these resources in one front. In the other front, I think Oman is committed to reduce the emission as per the international agreement or the Paris Agreement, and there are plans in place to meet that commitment that was updated just in July this year.
Well, it appears that 45 minutes goes by pretty quickly. So thank you very much, Dr. Khalil, for answering our questions, of course, and sharing your insights throughout this lecture. We appreciate it. Do you want to close out with any closing comments? Of course, the forum today is really tackling water, food, energy nexus as a whole. We'll be harvesting the recommendations and action points on how to address that. What would be your, let's say, final comment on the recommendation that should be adopted coming from an energy renewal perspective?
Ras, I think my final comment would be traditionally the nation or the country of Oman relied on oil and gas. And it is not far, but 50 odd years ago that the industry of oil and gas it barely existed. And 50 years is nothing in the age of nations. And I think the next 50 years for those who would be around for us and for our children, for our kids, will be completely different. And if we are to sail through the transition times, collaboration will be essential. Cross-sector talks and cross-sector understanding. How does the food sector in Oman, which is there's a big growth in the food sector in Oman. How do we support that sector and make sure that we benefit each other? Collaboration, I think, is the way to navigate the transition, and there is no single entity or single sector that would be able to navigate the transition in an effective manner. It would be an expensive navigation. If you do it alone, it will be a cost-effective and right navigation through the transition if you do it with everybody. That is my last message.
Seems like one of the most important recommendations to implement. Thank you very much.